Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Everything to Know about the new Form 1099 NEC and 1099 Miscellaneous session. My name is Carrie Bedell. I'm the Executive Director of the Greater Washington Society of CPAs. And before we get started today, I want to take a moment to inform you about a few items about today's session. During the session, you're going to see multiple choice polling questions throughout the event. Any participant who requires CPE credit must answer 75% of the polling questions in order to receive full credit for the webinar. Please mute your microphones, turn off your video to minimize background noise and distractions. You can use the chat feature at the bottom center of your screen to ask questions or participate in the discussions. At the conclusion of today's program, you will receive an email with a link to the webinar evaluation. You will also receive your CPE certificate after the webinar. So with all that housekeeping out of the way, it's my pleasure now to introduce today's speakers. Some of you may have seen in our online community that there were a lot of questions coming up about the 1099 and the changes this year. So I was really happy when I reached out to Doug that he was able to pull this session together for us somewhat quickly for you all. So thank you, Doug. And I'll introduce Doug first. Doug Palmer is a principal and the founder of Palmer Financial. For more than 2 decades, Doug has been a CPA and a CFO, serving both large and small organizations, both domestically and internationally. And he's been in the private sector as a CFO, a controller, and in other accounting roles. Prior to that, he spent a number of years at a Big Four public accounting firm as well. Adam Friedman is a tax partner with Palmer Financial. Adam is a licensed and practicing CPA as well. For almost 2 decades, Adam has served corporate and nonprofit clients in dealing with complex tax issues. And Brad Yoakum, MBA, is a senior director in nonprofit accounting with Palmer Financial. Brad has an MBA in accounting with over 2 decades of finance and accounting experience. And for almost a decade, Brad has served both nonprofit and corporate clients in dealing with their overall financial and accounting needs and sometimes complex accounting and finance requirements. So with that, I'm going to turn the session over to our 3 experts who are going to walk us through everything you need to know about the new Form 1099. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Carrie. So yeah, Adam is our resident tax expert and fields questions every year from our clients and also from our internal team about 1099s. Brad also serves clients out in California, and he too fields a lot of questions about 1099. So we were going to come up with something anyways, and I'm really happy that Carrie asked for us to present because I needed to learn the new material anyways relative to the 1099 NEC. So Carrie mentioned this, I think, but before we get started, if you have questions, please feel free to ask the questions by way of chat. Brad's going to try to field the questions, and we will answer them as we go through the presentation. The way we set this up is we wanted to have sort of just a back and forth with me and Adam and Brad about just different questions that come up, and so it's more of a discussion rather than just reading off of a deck. So we do have a deck, but we're going to try to be interactive with questions as well. So with that said, Adam, what is the new 1099 NEC and what is the reason for it?
The 1099 NEC is now used to report non-employee compensation that was previously reported on the 1099 MISC in Box 7. A few years ago, the IRS accelerated the due date for non-employee compensation to January 31st, but any other items on the 1099 MISC were still due February 28th. So that caused some confusion, and there were some potential penalty issues that shouldn't have been charged. And that's one of the reasons why for the new 1099 NEC.
And so I think what happened was there were people that would send 1099s in batch, and some of the 1099s had Box 7, but some of them didn't have Box 7, and those technically weren't late. Is that right, Adam?
Yes, that is exactly correct, Doug. And so that's why they separated out the forms, and that is one of the big reasons that they did that, because some of the forms were showing as late, but they were not technically late.
And so is this 1099 NEC new, Adam?
It is actually not. Well, it is not new. It hasn't been used since the 80s, but it is not a new form to the IRS.
Got it. Great. Thanks a lot. So just getting back to 1099s, what do 1099s in general get issued for?
They get issued for services that are performed where you pay someone more than $600 for the year. They also get issued for rents, prizes and awards, and certain other income. They do not get issued for goods that you purchase. And there are royalties, broker payments in lieu of dividends or tax-exempt interest, a number of other items that would get reported on either the 1099 NEC or the 1099 MISC.
Got it. Okay. So the deadlines, what are the new deadlines this year now that we've got the 1099 NEC? Can we go over the deadlines briefly?
Of course. So the deadline to recipients for the 1099 NEC and the 1099 MISC is February 1st. Normally January 31st, but since that falls on the weekend, it is February 1st this year. As far as filing with the IRS, the 1099 NEC, whether you file on paper or e-file, is due February 1st. And for the 1099 MISC, if you file on paper, it's due March 1st, normally February 28th, but March 1st this year, and March 31st if you e-file with the IRS.
Okay, so for everyone listening, most people will have a 1099 NEC to issue. That's due to the recipients and to the IRS on February 1st. If you have a 1099 MISC, it's due to the recipients on February 1st, but you can actually wait until March 1st to send it to the IRS, correct?
That is correct, yes. And you can, in March 31st for the 1099 MISC if you e-file it with the IRS.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Adam. So here's a look at the new form. You will notice that box 1 now says non-employee compensation on the 1099 NEC, and boxes 2 and 3 are grayed out, and then 4 through 7 have federal withholding information. Anything to share there, Adam?
The only thing to share there is this is the form for 2020. The 2021 form does have information that needs to be provided in box 2. It probably will not be applicable to most people, but in terms of 2020, the only information that needs to be reported is just the non-employee compensation. And then, like as Doug mentioned, if there's any withholdings on that compensation.
Got it. Okay. Great. So some of this might be repetitive, but so who gets a 1099 NEC then?
So independent contractors that are paid more than $600 that are not set up as S Corps or C Corps. The only exception there would be for medical payments. Well, for the 1099 NEC, the only exception that would be attorneys that are providing legal services, whether they're a corporation or not, they would still get a 1099 NEC. And for the 1099 MISC, there would be it would be LLCs, individuals, but no S Corps or C Corps. But if the payment is for medical service, a medical payment or attorney's fees, then their corporate structure does not affect whether they get a 1099 MISC as well.
Okay. I think I get it, but can you explain it one more time? You brought up the 1099 MISC, and you brought that up just to illustrate the fact that for the purposes of the people viewing, what would go on a 1099 MISC, and I think we'll get into it later in the presentation. But can you explain that again versus the 1099 NEC?
Yes, so the 1099 NEC is strictly for independent contractors that you pay more than $600 a year. For the 1099 MISC, and right, we will get to that in a later slide, but it would be for rent payments, certain other income, medical payments, and gross attorney's fees that are paid as far as like maybe a settlement goes. That would get reported on the 1099 MISC as opposed to the 1099 NEC.
Okay, so for most people listening, landlords would probably be the only thing that would be reported on the 1099 MISC, unless there's some kind of a settlement. Is that right?
In general, yes, that is correct. Most entities will only report rent payments on the 1099 MISC, although if they do have other income that needs to be, other income, which would be prizes or awards, that would be also reported on the 1099 MISC as well. But you're correct, Doug. In general, rent payments would be the biggest item that would be reported on the 1099 MISC.
Okay. So if everyone wanted to just get their 1099 NECs out of the way, they could do those first. And then the 1099 MISC, they could wait because that's not due until technically March 1st, but I guess it would be due to the landlord by February 1st. Is that right?
That is, yes, correct, right. So the due date to the recipient is the same for both forms. The due date to the IRS is different. It's later for the 1099 MISC.
Great. Okay, so Brad,
There's
did
a
you say?
couple, yeah, there's a couple of questions that came up that I wanted just to interject if it was good.
Yeah, please. Thanks.
One of the questions was, where would rental equipment be reported on the 1099?
So that will be reported in box 1 of the 1099 MISC unless you are paying it to a corporation. And then that is not required to be reported.
So one of the other questions is, where do payments to independent contractors that are S corps get reported?
They do not.
They do not. Yep.
Okay. So that hasn't changed. If you're an
Correct.
S corp, you don't get a 1099.
Unless you are an attorney, and then you were required to issue a 1099 to an attorney, whether they're an S corp or a C corp. No, it doesn't. Their corporate structure does not matter. They're always required to get a 1099 NEC or 1099 MISC if they're paid more than $600 for the year.
Got it. And again, they would get a 1099 MISC if it was related to some kind of a settlement, correct?
Correct. Yes, and 1099 NEC for actual legal services that they provided to your entity.
Thanks, Adam.
Great, thank you. So I think we touched on this, but the next slide, what about limited liability companies? What's the story there?
So LLCs are required to receive 1099s unless they are taxed as either an S corp or a C corp, and then they are not required to receive 1099s. And as I mentioned, attorneys receive 1099s regardless of their corporate structure.
Great. Okay. How about LLCs that are disregarded entities? How does that work?
So LLCs that are disregarded entities are required to receive 1099s. Technically, the owner of the entity would actually be who receives that 1099 as opposed to the entity itself. But yes, disregarded entities are required to receive 1099s.
Okay. And so actually, Adam, when the owner fills out the W-9, should they put their federal tax ID number or their social security number? What's technically correct?
So if a disregarded entity would use the social security number or the EIN number if the disregarded entity is owned by another entity. So if it's owned by an individual, it would use that individual's social security number.
Got it. Great. So should you issue a 1099 NEC or MISC to other nonprofits?
No, generally no, because you would not issue either form 1099s to other nonprofits, with the exception being if you are paying for medical or healthcare payments, which are reported on box 6 of the 1099 MISC.
Great. And I think it's also important to note that, if you're not sure about if you should send a 1099 to an entity, you can't get in touch with them, you don't have their W-9, it's probably better to send it than not send it, because there's no penalty for sending a form 1099 to someone who wasn't supposed to get one. Right, Adam?
That is 100% correct. Yes, Doug.
Great. And for our clients, a lot of times we'll do that. Wait, so do nonprofits need to issue 1099 NECs and 1099 MISCs? Do they need to issue them to their contractors?
Yes, they have the same requirements as other entities in terms of issuing 1099 NECs and 1099 MISCs.
Okay, so because sometimes questions come up for issuing a 1099 to a landlord, for instance. if you're a nonprofit? And the answer is yes. It's the same requirement as it would be if they were issuing it to an independent contractor, correct?
That is correct.
I got a question.
Sure, Brad.
A question came up. Is the 1099 NEC required if paid through an online payment such as PayPal or Venmo or Zelle?
No, it would not be required because the entity that is paid through should report, depending on how they're set up, should report that information.
Similar to a credit card?
Correct. Yes,
The
exactly.
credit card would pay it. Okay. Would file it.
Correct.
Thank you.
And that's on a later slide, but what's the name of that form? Is that a
That's
1099?
Sorry, Doug, go ahead.
Is that a 1099K that they would?
Yes, that the credit card company would issue. Correct.
Got it. So what if I'm not ready and I need to file an extension?
So an extension is available. I'm sorry. The extension is available, although for the 1099 NEC, there are 5 specific criteria that you would have to meet. Where for the 1099 MISC, there's an automatic 30-day extension. Both would be filed on Form 8809.
Okay. Great. So 1099 NEC pretty much can't file the extension unless something drastic happens. 1099 MISC, it's pretty easy to get a 30-day automatic extension.
Correct. And this is the extension on filing with the IRS, not necessarily filing, not on the recipient side.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. So what's the cost for missing vendors for 1099s? Has that changed for the 1099 NEC?
The rates, the penalties go up a little bit every year, but in terms of the 1099 NEC and the 1099 MISC, they're the same. It is for per form $50 for a 1099 that's filed no more than 30 days late, $110 for a 1099 that's filed 30 days late but before August 1st, $280 if the 1099 is filed after August 1st, in this case 2021, and then there's a $560 penalty for every form which is intentionally neglecting to file. So if you just disregard everything and don't file, then the penalty can be $560 per form.
Okay. So if you miss filing 1099s altogether and you have a lot of 1099s, what's a maximum that could happen?
So each tier of length of delay has a different maximum penalty, but for filing after August 1st of 2021, the maximum penalty for a small business is $1.1 million. But if for intentionally neglecting to file, there is no maximum penalty.
So it's unlimited.
Correct. Yes. If you're intentionally neglecting to file the 1099s, yes, it is unlimited.
Wow. Okay. Thanks. So where do you obtain the information to complete the 1099s? I think we touched on this before, but how do our clients get this information from the vendors?
Yeah, so you would have a vendor fill out a W-9 form. You would get all their personal information from that form. And then in terms of the amount that needs to be on the forms, you would get that from your check register, your income statement. You look through the payments that you made to that particular individual or entity throughout the year.
Got it. And should the information be cash basis or accrual basis?
The amount should be based on the cash basis. So actual cash or actual checks that were written to the contractor.
Great. So this is a big question that always comes up with our clients. And I differ in opinion with other colleagues, but should expenses be added? So if you pay a contractor that does services work, but they also have out-of-pocket expenses, should those be added to the 1099 or not?
So if your entity has an accountable plan where the independent contractor is providing receipts for the expenses, then those reimbursed expenses do not need to be included on the 1099, in this case, 1099 NEC. Where if your entity does not have an accountable plan and you're not requiring the independent contractor to submit receipts, then those reimbursed expenses should be included on the 1099 NEC. And in that case, then the contractor themselves would then deduct those payments when they file their tax return.
Got it. Because oftentimes we will get questions from the contractors themselves, and they will essentially complain that expenses were added to the 1099. But I think the answer that you can tell your vendors is that they should be deducting the expenses on their own Schedule C. Is that right?
That is, yes, that's correct. If the expenses are recorded on the 1099, then they, on their Schedule C or on their business tax return, they would take those same expenses to net the two together.
Got it. Great. Any questions about that have come up, Brad?
No, not yet, but it may.
Okay.
There's some other ones we can field, but we can get them towards the end.
Okay. Brad, what do you do for your clients?
Well, we first all get together and say a quick prayer. But actually, we try to be proactive. And one of the approaches that have worked, and we talked about this the other day, one of the approaches that works with our clients is when they take on a new vendor and they have to fill out that W-9, they get that filled out before any payment will be issued. And that takes out just a ton of scrambling and last minute trying to locate and track down people when issuing 1099s. If you do that ahead of time, you're that much ahead of the game.
Yep. Yeah, we try to encourage our clients to do the same thing. I think that's a really good best practice. And actually, we have a slide on that later on too. But that's helpful. Thanks, Brad. So here's a look at the new 1099 MISC. And you will notice that the box 7 now is a different description. Anything to share here more, Adam?
Just that the same information will be reported on the 1099 MISC as in previous years, except for non-employee compensation. But yes, the layout and the boxes are a little bit different than in previous years.
Okay, so this slide essentially talks about, we've bolded what we think people watching may be interested in. Usually it would be box 1, rents, and maybe box 10, but there's nothing else that you see that could come up, is there?
The only other box that could potentially come up is box 3, other income. Those would, I would imagine those would be the 3 most used boxes in general.
Okay. Great. So do we need to issue 1099s for fellowships or scholarships?
No, 1099s are not required for fellowships or scholarships. They would be reported on Form W-2 because they are considered wages.
Great. And that question oftentimes comes up as well. How about a 1099 for an honorarium?
Yes, so an honorarium, if it's more than $600, will be reported on the 1099 NEC.
Okay. And so for the honorarium, do you just do the services part or just the fee part, or what about expenses?
So expenses, if they're based on actual receipts, they will be excluded from the 1099 NEC.
Okay. So that's the same thing as we went over before. If they submit receipts, then you can take the expenses out. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Super. Thank you. Now we went over the landlord, but we have a slide on landlords. So yes, the landlord gets one. How about if it's a landlord that's an S Corp or a C Corp? Did we talk about that?
So landlords that are S Corps or C Corps are not required to receive the 1099 MISC. Only if they're, only if they're corporate, they're not structured as a corporation. If they are, they're not required to receive a 1099 MISC.
And that's similar to any vendor then.
Correct. Yes, right. With the exception being medical payments and attorneys, like we previously talked about. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, how about if you pay a real estate agent?
So if you pay rent directly to the real estate agent, you are not required to issue them a 1099 MISC.
You're not required to pay the real estate agent itself a 1099. You're not
Correct.
required to issue them.
Yes, if the rent is paid directly to the real estate agent, then you are not required to issue them a 1099. The real estate agent, you're not required to issue the real estate agent a 1099 MISC.
Okay. And how about if you made the payment to your landlord by way of credit card?
No, you're not required to issue a 1099 MISC to the landlord if you pay with a credit card. The credit card company will issue a 1099K or should issue a 1099K to the landlord.
Okay. Great. Well, that makes sense, except for the real estate agent part to me. So how about if you pay other vendors with a credit card? I think we went over this, but how does that work?
Right. So that would work the same way. So if you pay someone with a credit card, the credit card company would issue the 1099K to that individual or entity. You as the nonprofit entity would not be required to issue a 1099.
Got it. And we've had, I've seen 1099Ks many times in the past. So just moving on here, what happens if you put together your, what happens if you put together your 1099s and there's an error on the 1099? What are you supposed to do?
So there are two different types of errors which require two different types of additional reporting. If it's an incorrect dollar amount, code, or a checkbox, or the 1099 was filed and it shouldn't have been, then the way that you correct the error is to prepare a new 1099 with all the correct information. If there was no tax ID number or an incorrect tax ID number or payee name, then it's a two-step process. You would prepare a new corrected 1099 showing the amount is zero, and then you would prepare a second 1099 with all the correct information.
Okay, so let's just go over this one more time. So if you send a vendor a 1099 and the dollar amount is correct, what are you supposed to do?
So if the dollar amount is correct, but
the dollar amount is incorrect. I'm sorry.
So if the dollar amount is incorrect, then you would issue a whole new complete 1099 with all the correct information. There's only one step if the dollar amount is incorrect.
So you reissue that to the recipient of the 1099, and then you're also supposed to send that to the IRS. Is that right?
Yes, and you would check that as being the box that says corrected as a corrected 1099.
And you also, and we're going to get into this later, but you also send another 1096, or is it just the 1099?
So if you're filing on paper, then you would have to do if the dollar amount changes, then yes, you would have to send a new 1096. If you're filing electronically, a 1096 is not required in general, so you wouldn't have to if you're filing the 1099s electronically.
Got it. Okay. And the main thing there is that a lot of times we have vendors of our clients that will come back to us and say that the 1099 dollar amount was wrong, and we may go into the system and find out that in fact somehow the information was pulled together incorrectly, and we would need to issue them a corrected 1099. So really, you would send them the corrected 1099 and send the corrected 1099 to the IRS.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And then the second part is if you have an incorrect social security number, for instance, for a contractor, what do you do again?
So it's a two-step process. You would prepare a new corrected 1099 showing, that still has incorrect information, but showing the amount is zero. And then the second step would be you prepare a second 1099, not corrected, or not checking the box that says corrected, with all of the correct information.
Hey guys, could we go back just a minute? There's a couple questions on the scholarships and fellowships.
Okay.
One of the questions, the W-2 should be issued for scholarships and fellowships. Is that correct?
Yeah, so taxable scholarships and fellowships would be reported on W-2 as opposed to the 1099.
And the question, we give scholarships to nursing students, non-employees. We also have fellowships paid via federal funding, which seems like a pass-through of funds.
Yeah, so I don't know the exact answer off the top of my head. I'm happy if Brad, if that person wants to, email us that question and we can get back to them, offline, I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, Heather, if you can do that, that'd be great.
That's a good question.
That way we can follow up with it. And what if you
Thanks,
pay
Heather.
rent? What's that?
Oh, no, I was just saying, I was thanking Heather for sending the email. That's all.
And what if you pay rent to a management company? Do the same rules apply with 1099s?
That one I actually give, I need to, with the management company, I believe you are supposed to issue a 1099, but I will double check and, just to make sure. And, I can certainly, if whoever asked that question wants to send us a quick email, I can get back to them ASAP as soon as we're off the call.
No problem. And then I think one of the last current ones, we have student interns who come from foreign countries. We give them a stipend. Do they get 1099s?
So if student interns who come from a foreign country, if their work is performed in the US, they would actually receive a 1042S as opposed to a 1099.
Thank you.
That's another good question. We have a client that we work with that every single year, don't we, Adam?
Yes, correct. And
Adam, how about? Well, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Doug. Just to get back to the question on the property manager, if the rent is paid directly to the property management company, no 1099 is required to be issued. So that would be the same thing as if the rent was paid directly to a real estate agent.
Okay. Same rule applies. Okay.
Correct. Yes.
Adam, how about this student interns that are U.S. citizens? We've been through that before.
So student interns who are U.S. citizens will receive a 1099, and they will receive a 1099. In this case, will receive a 1099 NEC.
Okay. Or depending on the nature, they might need to go on payroll, right?
Correct. Right. Or right. They potentially be on payroll, and obviously the interns, if they're paid more than $600, is when they will receive the 1099 NEC. But correct. They could also be on on payroll, and depending on the specific situations of that entity.
Great. Now we talked about 1096s. What's the deal there with the 1099 NEC now? And if you electronically file, are there any changes? And can you explain what a 1096 is?
A 1096, okay, so of course, a 1096 is just the overview of the 1099s that were filed. So it'll list the number of 1099s and the dollar amount associated with the 1099s. So there would be one, if you're filing on paper, you would do one 1096 for the 1099 NEC, all the 1099 NECs that you file, and one form 1096 for the 1099, all the 1099 MISCs that you file. If filing electronically, 1096 are not required for either form.
Got it. And like we said before, if you do a corrected 1099 or 1099 NEC, if you're doing the correction on paper, you would need to do a 1096 for each correction. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Great. So what are some good companies that you guys use for issuing 1099s? Most of our clients now are using electronic 1099 forms and using companies to get that done. Brad, what do you use?
The two primary ones are QuickBooks Online and Eagle View Filing. The reason why we use Eagle View Filing is in the case that maybe they were paid outside of the system or some cash and the dollar amounts don't match up exactly to what's showing up in QuickBooks. So Eagle View Filing can do the electronic filing based on the dollar amount that you put in. But primarily we use QuickBooks Online that portal through QuickBooks Online, and we've had some real good results with it. As long as the information is in there, that's correct and updated.
I think using that program is nice. A lot of our clients use that. And some of the other two that we have listed as well, e-file my forms. And I'm not familiar with tax1099.com, but we got some information from them for this presentation. So I want to give them a shout out. So the next part of the presentation is building systems for, for 1099. So we're kind of late in the game. And so people are going to be scrambling in the next couple of weeks to get 1099s, the NECs and the MISCs out by the end of the month. But we'll talk about systems to prepare for next year and also for this year. So it's always a best practice to gather the W-9s during the year. Brad, I think you mentioned that earlier. If there's no policy, you may want to get your organization to create a policy that you don't pay your vendors until you have a W-9 on file. And for some of our clients, they won't get paid. They don't get payments unless they submit a W-9. So it really is a good practice. That way you're not scrambling at the very last minute trying to call companies to find out if they should get a W-9 or if they should get a 1099 and try to get a W-9.
Absolutely.
Anything else to share there, Brad?
Now, again, it's just a matter of being proactive, and it's so much easier to take care of that stuff during the year than scrambling the last couple of weeks as we are now. Yeah, there'll be one or two or a couple that you need to track down, but it's a lot easier to track down just the couple ones than 15, 20, 40, 50, people.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to get back as quickly as you'd like them to.
And it's easier said than done. It's, when you're in July, it's less easy to get a W-9, but you should really try to do that.
And it's funny how vendors respond when you don't pay them.
That's true. That's a good control.
Yep.
So how about the 1099 NEC? Is there anything different that we need to do to prepare for the 1099 NEC? And Brad, I'm sure you're doing this for your clients, but if you just separate out the 1099 NEC vendors from the 1099 MISC vendors, maybe create two reports in your software system to make that possible, and then just keep the two separate lists going forward. For the most part, most people watching this will probably just be doing 1099 NEC vendors. So it probably will be the same list other than the landlord.
Yeah, I think so. Like you said, other than the landlord, that would be the primary difference for most.
And so another good practice is to centrally locate all the information, the 1099 information from last year, from the year before, and then keep the current W-9s on file all in one shared drive. We do this for our clients, and it's super helpful when putting together the 1099s for our clients, because we have all the legacy information for their vendors.
Yeah, that's a great idea to have that, all the previous 1099s in one source, one information. It saves a lot of time in tracking down.
And this is more for fourth quarter of the year. We're past that, but it's a good idea to pull 1099 reports in the fourth quarter and start going through the numbers to make sure that you have information for all the vendors that you're going to need, and then you can send requests for the vendors that you don't have W-9 information for. I'm just trying to get to the next slide.
I can ask a couple questions if you want right now.
Yeah, this slide I think is repetitive. Create procedures to collect W-9 from existing vendors. Yeah, that's actually, let me just go over this and then we'll go to the questions.
Okay.
One thing you may want to be aware of is a lot of times, and we have a client that's doing this right now, is they're switching from a LLC taxed as a partnership to an LLC taxed as a S corp, and so that changes the 1099 necessity. So it's a good idea to try to get W-9s from vendors on a regular basis because their entity makeup might have changed, and also the address information. Go ahead, Brad.
Here's an interesting question that's come up with us, and it's probably come up with you guys as well. You get an IRS letter on it regarding a tax ID or the social security number is the IRS has an issue with it. And you look at your records, you check with your vendor and you're saying, hey, that social and that tax ID number looks correct. Is there any next best steps or procedures to follow up with the IRS saying, hey, the information that I've checked and verified is correct? Have you guys heard of any kind of electronic submission issues with the IRS, maybe not reading the number correctly?
I haven't necessarily heard of any electronic issues in terms of not reading the number correctly, but yes, I think, if you get an entity gets a letter saying that the information that was filed in the 1099 does not agree with their records, but it agrees with your records, then you would obviously at that point follow up with the vendor, first thing to see if, okay, well, maybe just, the information that is in, our system or their system is incorrect. And if the vendor can give you the correct information, if you can't get a hold of the vendor or the vendor's not willing to give you the correct information, then I think as the entity, you would go back to the IRS and let them know that this is the information we have. We made every effort to get the correct information from the vendor. We were not able to, and obviously the IRS would follow up on their end as far as that goes.
Okay. And here's an interesting one with credit cards. As we were talking before, you don't have to issue the 1099 when paying by a credit card. Well, how does the credit card company have that EIN number for them to issue the 1099? Where do they get that?
So because the credit card company, honestly, specifically where they get that information, I don't know for sure, but they obviously have access to the information to whoever they are paying in order to issue whatever they issue, and they would only issue the 1099K if they are issuing to like another business. So they would be able to acquire that information on their end, and if they're required to issue the 1099K. Specifically where they get it, I don't know honestly, but it would be on the credit card company's end in order to get that information.
But Adam, I think so. When you set up when the vendor sets up with the credit card processing credit card processor, they need to submit that information.
Yes, right. That you're exactly correct, right? Because if the entity is using a service to process their credit card payments, correct. The credit card service would have all the applicable information from the person who's setting up that account. You're exactly right.
Yeah, and it's a rigid process. We had a client that did that recently, and you have to give a lot of information. It's not that simple to set up with a credit card company.
Right, and you're exactly right. So if the entity can accept credit card payments, then right, they would have already set up all of their information with the credit card company, and that's how the 1099K would be issued.
But I think part of the question, as an example, I'm thinking what they're looking for. Let's say they have an Amex card and they use it every month and they're paying a bunch of vendors every month. And now Amex at the end of the year has to issue those 1099s to those random people that I've been paying. How do they know how to track down their name, their address, their tax ID, all that stuff when I'm just paying them by credit card every month?
Oh, so this is not where the vendor. So that would be the same, because if the vendor is getting the money from Amex, they would have their account set up with American Express in order to accept payments. So like Doug was saying, the Amex would have their information already in order to send them to 1099K, because that would be the only way that Amex could then get the money to the vendor who was being paid.
So, but I think so. The vendor is going to have a lot of money coming in from a bunch of different sources, and the 1099K just is an aggregate number that goes to the vendor for the IRS to make sure that they're reporting all the receipts that have come in. Is that right, Adam?
Yes. So each credit card company would then, the ultimate vendor who gets that money each credit card company would issue a 1099K to that particular vendor based on the amount of money that the credit card company, which they got from other, from other people, paid to that particular vendor. And that's exactly right. That's how the IRS will get the 1099K, and then they will, in theory, be able to match up what the ultimate vendor puts on their tax return and compared to what they received in actual credit card payments.
And that's in totality. I don't think there's no way for the IRS to know that this nonprofit organization paid a vendor such and such amount. It's just a gross amount that the vendor gets from the credit card company.
Yes, exactly right. It's not a specific right. The 1099K is aggregate, not specific to who actually paid the credit card company.
That makes sense. It's the total amount through the year. They're not breaking down every single vendor payment. They're looking at how much total did they receive in the year. Then we'll send out a report. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a high level check for the IRS. If the vendor has,
right,
$500,000 listed, but the 1099K is $1 million, there's a problem there.
Right.
Right. So the credit card company is not concerned with who, like Amex is not concerned with who paid them. Their requirement is to the ultimate vendor that they pay to issue the 1099K, like Doug said, in aggregate.
Got it.
That's a very, very good question.
So I think this is our last slide, but if you pay vendors as 1099 vendors through payroll, and we have clients that do that, it's a good way to regularly pay your vendors. A lot of times, some of our clients will have public relations consultants or different consultants that do different things for our nonprofit clients. If you put them on payroll, you can make it so that they're a 1099 vendor in the payroll system itself, and they get paid when everyone else gets paid. Vendors like that, but they also the payroll company will then usually send a 1099 to the vendor at the end of the year. So you have to be aware of that, because when you're doing your 1099s, you want to make sure that you don't send them a 1099 as well as the payroll company sending them a 1099. And when you take their 1099 out of the system, you would send all your 1099s, if you're filing by paper, with a 1096, and that 1099 should not be included if you know the payroll company already sent it. Anything to share there, Adam? Have you?
No, I think that definitely covers it. Right? You don't want to duplicate 1099s. That's the main thing, because then the ultimate vendor looks like they received twice as much money throughout the year as they actually did.
Yeah. But also in general, let's say if you do a batch of 1099s and you send them out the week before they're due, the 1099 NEC for instance, and you send them with the 1096, and let's say you figure out that there's 3 more 1099s that need to be submitted, you would also submit those 1099 NECs with a separate 1096, right, Adam?
Correct.
So each batch has to come with a 1096 that totals the number of 1099s that you're sending in that batch.
Yes, if you're filing on paper, as we said earlier.
If you're filing by paper. Yeah. If you're doing it electronically, there's no need for a 1096.
Correct.
And that's it. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I got a couple that come through.
Okay, we got a few more minutes.
This one might have been covered before, but will grants, scholarships, and monetary awards to individuals go on the new Form 1099 NEC?
So scholarships do not. Awards, if they are for service performed, would go on the new 1099 NEC. If they are not for service performed, they will go on the 1099 MISC in box 3 as other income.
Okay, thanks. And here's a leasing question, another one. On another webinar for 1099, they said they needed 1099s to leasing companies for software and equipment. Do you agree? As do you send to vendors regardless if they are incorporated or not?
So technically, if you rent software or equipment, you should send them a 1099 MISC, but not if they're incorporated. So the same rules would apply as with other vendors, once again, with the exception of medical payments and attorney's fees.
Thanks, Adam. One question, this is more of a procedural standpoint. How do you handle receiving secured W-9s from your vendors that use their social security numbers?
Well, I'll tell you what we do. Any back and forth with any W-9 information, we make sure that we put a passcode on the PDF, or we will give our clients access to the shared drive. And usually the shared drive itself is secure. So if someone uploads a W-9 into this secure drive, that's enough security to make sure that the social security number isn't stolen.
Okay. And no 1099s to accounting firms, correct?
Accounting firms would receive 1099s unless they're incorporated.
Same rules apply.
Correct.
Seeing if I've missed anybody or that haven't been already answered in the discussion. This question, what form do you use to send the totals to the IRS or any 1042S student interns who work abroad?
So that would be form 1042.
Okay, so they answered that. That's good. This question, I'm not sure if it says, how complicated is it to e-file? Do you need special software? Do you need a special login to a site? I'm not sure if the e-file is to a specific site or.
Well, I do know that the few sites that we listed,
Yeah,
e-file my forms, I know is extremely easy to do. You literally just go onto their site, put in the information, follow their prompts, and it's very easy to e-file through e-file my forms. I'm assuming, Brad, the coming to use is pretty simple, pretty straightforward.
yeah, I don't think of the ones listed that the one I had looked at, but the other three were all pretty straightforward.
Yeah, they're nice too because they capture the information. If you use them year after year, the same vendor's information is also listed there. It's good to get the updated W-9s and keep your own backup on a shared drive, but they too have the information.
Exactly.
And we're running out of time. Anything else?
Somebody had a question about a corrected 1099, and that was already answered in previous slides. So when you guys get those slides, some of those questions you may have will be answered in those slides if you didn't have a chance to see them earlier.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. If you have any questions, please send us an email. Our emails are listed here. I think Walansa is going to send out the this PowerPoint deck that we've put together later on, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have in the next couple of weeks. So thanks again.
Thanks very much, guys. That's correct. Wallensa will send out the PowerPoint slides to everybody later today. Everyone who was registered and participated will receive your CPE certificate post event as well. You've got the contact information for all of your speakers, and you may follow up with them. I know there were a lot of questions, so if you have additional questions, please follow up with them via email or phone. And thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
guys very
again,
much.
Carrie.
Have a good
Thanks, guys. Enjoy your weekend.
Yeah,
You too. Take care.
thank you.